The first strategy I'd like to discuss is a strategy of attrition. And here the idea is that the terrorist group does a constant stream of attacks, often low level, and these inflict casualties, they destroy property, and they slowly wear down the other side. Over time, the security services become demoralized. The government has to spend more and more on providing security, and the people on the other side start to question whether it's worth the investment, whether they should simply give in to the terrorist group and go home. Now, success here often depends on the government the terrorist group is opposing. A first question is simply how much does it care about public opinion? A dictatorship, for example, might be able to ignore large numbers of casualties and control spending without having popular voices complain. A second question is how much does the dispute matter to the government that the terrorist group opposes? For example, when terrorists attacked the United States in Lebanon to get US peacekeepers out, it was relatively easy because the United States didn't care much about Lebanon and was not committed to this mission. If a terrorist group wanted the United States to do something very deep and fundamental, like, say, change the US Constitution, that would be much, much harder and require far more violence and far more of a struggle to even get this issue to be considered. A problem for a terrorist group to do this is that in order to maintain a strategy of attrition, they need to survive. And they're going to face an onslaught by a powerful government that invariably has more police, more intelligence than the terrorist group has members. And so the terrorist group has to weather that onslaught and still be able to do attacks. In addition, the terrorist group's violence is usually unpopular among the very people they claim to champion. So especially initially, many people will question whether they need to kill innocents on the other side to achieve their goals. An example of a successful attrition strategy is the Irish Republican Army. Now, throughout the 20th century, the Irish Republican Army existed in different forms. And we see a huge struggle in Northern Ireland begin in the late 1960s. And what happens is the struggle begins with the suppression of peaceful protests. You have essentially a civil rights movement, and you have Protestant-dominated police go into Catholic areas and beat people up. You have mobs of Protestants that also go in and essentially commit tremendous abuses against civilians. And that suppression of a peaceful alternative, the outrage it generates among the population, creates broad support for the Irish Republican Army. And they conduct constant attacks on the British and on symbols of the British government in Northern Ireland. And you see the steady toll this begins to take on the British government, that there's a constant question over the resources involved, and the British have to deploy more and more police. And at the height of the Troubles, as they're called, the British deploy 20,000 soldiers, quite a large number for a country that very much does not want to be spending its resources in Northern Ireland. Martin McGuinness, a senior IRA leader, says in 1977, quote, "We're going to keep blathering on until the Brits leave." And again, in a very succinct way, this summarizes the IRA strategy, which is keep the struggle going, and over time the Brits will start to question their commitment to Northern Ireland and seek a way out. And you do see this. There's a sense among British leaders that they can't defeat the IRA, that the only way to end the conflict is through political concessions. And over time, the British government starts to make those concessions, and we see the Provisional IRA gain not all of its goals, but at least some of its goals.